Hi teens, this week's Midweek Meditation is entitled Be All That You Can Be. Be All That You Can Be. If you had a friend in front of you whose eyes were closed, how would you describe this that's on the screen? What would you call it? How would you describe this one? What would you call it? Well, you might say it's the same coin, just seen from the other side. What's your point? Well, all of these depict a quarter. All of them have the same value, even though they're different in some respects. The same is true of these. We have a quarter for every one of our states. One side is all the same, an image of Washington, but on the other side, there's something particular that goes along with the state depicted. You can see the four that we have: North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia. Just something particular about those states that stands out. You are uniquely made by God's design. Yeah, there are parts of you, there are aspects of you that are the same as every other person. And yet, there are some stark differences as well. And all of those differences are by God's design for His purpose. The English Standard Version of Psalm 139, 13 through 16 states, "You formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth." That's figurative language for the mother's womb. David goes on, "Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them." God's design includes physical details. Exodus 4:11, "Then Moses said to the Lord, O my Lord, I'm not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." So the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute, or deaf, or seeing, or blind? Have not I, the Lord? These things, young people, the mute, the deaf, the seeing, the blind, are not by accident. They're part of God's divine providence. Oftentimes we don't understand what He's doing, and yet we can trust who He is. And there's an illustration in John 9 that really points out that He has a larger plan than just what we can see. Jesus told His disciples that the man was born blind so that the works of God could be displayed in him. It was on that day, at that hour, on that road, that Jesus, the Son of God, healed a full-grown man who was born blind. How many years went by before God was glorified through the healing of that man? We don't know. The scriptures don't tell us. But the object lesson is very real. God has a reason for everything that He brings into our lives, even our physical details. Physical details are for God's purposes. We're concerned with our appearance mainly because of the type of attention that it draws to us. God molds us and makes us for His purposes. Isaiah 53:2 states, "When we shall see Him, there is no beauty that we should desire Him." That verse is speaking of God the Son. When we shall see Him, there is no beauty that we should desire Him. Why did God make Jesus a very ordinary man? Because He didn't want us thinking that our appearance or our skills and abilities were what give us worth. And on top of that, He didn't want the Jews thinking their Messiah was some knight in shining armor. His agenda was totally different, and He made Jesus the way He was for that very purpose. On the other hand, when you read of Joseph, it calls him handsome. Moses was called a beautiful child, and the beauty of Moses was what attracted Pharaoh's daughter to him and saved his life in the providence of God. David was called good-looking. Saul and later Absalom were dubbed the most handsome men in Israel at the time of their lives. Paul, on the other hand, appeared weak. The apostles were varied in their abilities and appearances, to be sure, but all of them were ordinary men. Abilities and gifts are God's purposes. 2 Chronicles 2, speaking of skills, Huram is a master craftsman who could accomplish any plan given to him, along with the skillful men of Solomon and David. And the context was the construction of the temple. When it comes to spiritual gifts, Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 12, 17 through 19, if the whole body, or the church, if the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where would be the smelling? But now God has set the members, each one of them, in the body, just as he pleased. And if they were all one member, where would the body be? We need each other. He's gifted some to teach. He's gifted some to administrate. He's given some to help. He's given some to be peacemakers. And all of the gifts that God gives his children are to edify and to build up the body of Christ. Often simpler is better, and it's all a matter of perspective. A simple flathead screwdriver will open more screw heads than a star head or a Phillips head. But the right size and the right shape for each design does the best job. Teens, God has equipped you to do your job. Don't wish that you were someone else. Don't wish that you were another type of screwdriver, if I can use that illustration. God has equipped you to do your job. Your responsibility is to hone and to use the skills and gifts that God has given you. In 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 8, Paul clarifies this. He says, who then is Paul? And who's Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his own labor. When you look at those verses, Apollos would have nothing to water if Paul had not planted. And if Paul had not planted, there would not have been a harvest. But the flip side of it, if Apollos had not watered, there would not be a harvest either. And the point of the illustration is God uses each of us with our own particular gifts for his providence to be outlived, for his will to be done. Personal illustration. When I was coming up as a teenager, I went out for junior varsity football. I was 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 112 pounds. And you can see the word not a good decision. I was manhandled. That size body in football just don't work. When I got my license at 16, I had to sit on a boat cushion to see over the dash of the Saab that I drove. I was stopped by the police because I didn't look 16. And then there came wrestling, my junior and senior year of high school. At least the other guy was my size. And I have on the screen my good friend Ray. This is kind of a humorous illustration, but the point being, while I could not play football and certainly couldn't play basketball, I could wrestle because the other guy was my size. Now Ray, when you wrestled, you lined up along one wall as a team, and the other team, the opponents, would line up against the other wall, and each weight class would come under the scales to make sure that you made weight. So as was my custom, I started counting up the weight scales to me. There were only a couple ahead of me. And I got up to 112 pound weight class, and I looked at this guy, and I'm thinking, that cannot be. That cannot be, because I looked across from me, and this dude was there who had a shadow of a beard. He was a high school guy, and he had a carpet on his chest. Yeah, hair all over his chest, and a beard, maybe 2 or 3 days growth, whatever. Well, we got up to the scales to weigh, and they called my name out. I went by Bobby at the time. They said Bobby Latour. I was praying I wouldn't make weight. I made weight, and then he got on the scales, and I kid you not, they said his name. This hairy-chested, bearded wonder, his name was Ray Agony. Well, we got out on the mat after the first 2 matches, and I'm trying to think, how can I get my back on the floor without him killing me or breaking me limb from limb? And things got worse. Here he is over there standing with his carpet on his chest and shadow of a beard, and then he smiled at me. And he had worn dentures, and he had taken them out, understandably not to get them broken, but there was a gap, big black hole right here. So you got this guy in a wrestling stance smiling at you with no teeth in the front, hairy chest, beard, I think I lasted a minute and a half maybe, which really was commendable. But wrestling, the other guy mainly was my size, and I was able to letter. BJU sophomore check. 60 of us started out as art majors, and only 6 graduated. Now, why do I say that? It sounds braggadocious. Nope, I'm here to tell you. I was one of the 6 because it was God's providence for me. I rarely do art anymore, but God took me through that art program at BJ for the discipline. My senior art show, I did about 30 paintings in the summer between my junior and senior year. They only accepted one of them. Were they that bad? Not necessarily. I sold them all. They just weren't up to the standard that my art teachers wanted, and it made me produce art. I tended to want to please them to the degree that I would overwork my stuff, and I couldn't. I was still taking academic courses while I was preparing for my senior art show, and God was in all of that. The lesson learned: do your best to be all that you can be. That's the lesson learned. No matter how God has made you or how He's equipped you, be content and useful. Notice these characters in the Bible. He put a hammer in Noah's hand because He gifted Noah in that area. He put a rod in Moses' hand to lead them out of Egypt. He put a sword in Joshua the soldier's hand. He put a sling and later a harp in David's hand. He put wisdom in Solomon's mind. He put the ability to defend the gospel in Paul's mind, and He made Apollos eloquent so that he could proclaim the gospel and defend it also. What skills and gifts had God given you to use for His glory? What skills and what gifts has God given to you to use for His glory? I trust that you'll pray that He'll show you what those are, that you'll hone them and use them in a way that will point others to Christ and bring glory to God.